Welcome back. Russia's making some major moves in the new space race. It will spend up to $20 billion on space by 2026 to keep pace with China and the United States. Kaitlyn Johnson's deputy director of the Aerospace Security Project, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Kaitlyn, welcome back. It is good to see you again. We talk about China all the time in terms of great power competition. The National Defense Strategy specifies China and Russia. We forget, don't we, sometimes, that Russia actually beat us into space in the 1950s.
They certainly did. When you talk about the space race of the Cold War, you can say, well, did we win or Russia? Yes, we put boots on the moon first, but they sent the first active satellite into orbit.
What does that mean for the way that we should think about the space race in the 21st century, given that China has also made it very clear that they want to stake a claim to not just bandwidth in space, but actual territory? They're headed for the moon also.
They are, and they actually just signed an agreement with Russia to build a joint lunar base. We'll see how that goes. But, you know, when we think about Russia in the space domain, we really think about this legacy of the Soviet Union. And certainly the new Russian state is capitalizing on some of the old Soviet programs that were ongoing and a lot of the designs and programs that, you know, they've brought into the 21st century.
What are they bringing into the 21st century, Kaitlyn? What are they expanding on in terms of what they already have and the capabilities they're trying to build?
Sure. So they have a PNT system, just like the United States operates the GPS system. They have robust communications as well as ISR satellites. So gaining intelligence and both looking at the Earth optically, but also sensors in orbit. Missile defense satellites missile warning satellites, are also a big topic of conversation when we talk about the U.S. and Russian space program. But, you know, my group studies a lot of counterspace developments, and really Russia is putting a lot of its effort into not just its own space capabilities, but denying the U.S. access to our space capabilities. How
does that compare to the way that we have to think about China? Is China also active in counterspace operations, or are they primarily working on their own stuff?
China is also doing everything as well, both posturing themselves against the U.S. space advantage and investing in their own capabilities. Similar to Russia, both have used counterspace weapons or counterspace capabilities to protect their own systems, to deny the U.S. access to GPS or satellite communications in areas like Ukraine, the South China Sea, and Syria.
I mentioned the $20 billion that President Putin in Russia has devoted to their space strategy. This is a 10-year strategy, so averages out to $2 billion a year. What kind of visibility or knowledge do we have about where that money will go, and what can we draw from what we know about that to think about Russian space trajectory moving forward, to think about where they want to go and what they want to do?
Sure. So, you know, like China, Russia's budget is very under wraps, and so we don't know exactly where that money will go. But if we look at what they've been investing in the past, you know, couple years to past decade, we see big investments in civil space capabilities, like their work with the United States on the International Space Station. So looking towards going back to the moon, certainly, as well as military space capabilities, continuing to build out some of these constellations that we just talked about: communications, ISR, missile warning, PNT, things that really enable a modern military. And lastly, you know, their counterspace capabilities, the ability to attack U.S. satellites, to deny our access to our space systems, what really gives the United States a competitive edge, and taking that back, bringing, you know, leveling the playing field.
You mentioned the Russia-China cooperation in space. Do we have any insight into whether there's any kind of knowledge transfer there, any kind of technology sharing there that would give China the ability to close the gap? They're quick calculation, 60 years behind Russia and the United States in space. And I wonder whether Russia is essentially helping them to try to close that timeline by sharing what they have with the Chinese.
Well, whenever you have international cooperation on such a level that involves this kind of technology and knowledge transfer, it's really a great way to gain insight into what the other country is doing, but also, see where they are at. And Russia and China, interestingly, have prioritized different parts of their space programs, and almost will have a symbiotic relationship in space. I wouldn't characterize China as so far behind. They do have a working space station on orbit right now. They just launched the last piece and sent up their astronauts to it. So I think that relationship will build trust, will, yes, result in some technology or knowledge transfer, but really just continue to deepen that relationship, which has struggled in the past. So we'll see how successful their international relationship actually ends up being.
Kaitlyn Johnson, thanks very much as always. Great to have you back.
Thanks, Francis.